There's a million ways that the takeaway has been taught in golf instruction. There's a million ways to get the club from here to here. You can set your wrists early, you can shift off the ball and lift your arms, you can lift off the ball, lift your arms and set the club early, you can try and turn. There's a million ways to do it, but there's only one optimal way to do it efficiently, do it correctly, and keep yourself centered. And that's a big key of the rotary swing, is obviously we're trying to rotate around our spine. So using our spine as our fixed point or our center point, we want to try and move in a direction and use our muscles and joints in a way that allows us to rotate around our spine efficiently. And what's the beauty of it is when you do it correctly, your movements are really about this far to complete the takeaway. Now that may sound crazy, but in a moment you'll understand. Because technically the club travels from here to here about 7 or 8 feet. We'll call it about 2.5 yards or so. Now, if I let everything go back that way, my head and everything, and I shift off to the right, now I've got a big shift back to the left. I may put the club still in the same position looking down the line. It may look right on camera, but is it the right way to move? You know, if we're wanting to stay centered, obviously we don't need a big shift to the right. There's obviously a weight shift to allow yourself to store power, but we don't need a big sway with the upper body. So if we were trying to make the simplest machine possible, how would we do it? Well, I'm going to show you. If you understood the push versus pull videos on the website and understanding how to rotate around your spine rather than pushing from the left side, pulling from the right, this will be a piece of cake. Because all you're really trying to do is move your shoulder blade, a bony part that sits on your top of your rib cage, about this far. And it's going to move slightly down and in towards the spine, because remember, we're trying to stay centered. So if we're going to try and stay centered, we want to move in towards center. Simple concept, right? So if you have an engineering degree, we're going to try and create centripetal force, and that's going to allow the club to move this way. And this is an important concept of the golf swing. You're always trying to move in the opposite direction that the club's going. That may sound kind of crazy, but that's the #1 problem for most amateurs, is they try and move the club and move their body in the direction that they're trying to move the club. And when that happens, all kinds of things go wrong, but certainly it's inefficient. And if you're trying to understand rotary motion, centripetal force is always going in the opposite direction of the centrifugal force. Centripetal is the action. You want to be the action, moving in towards center, and the club moving out away from you is the centrifugal force. That's the reaction. So let's look at this in real world terms. All I'm going to do is I'm going to move my shoulder blade this far, and the movement is going to be so small and so efficient, you won't believe how easy to get a perfect takeaway it is. So all I'm going to do, move my shoulder blade. That's it. That's all I did. I'm moving my right shoulder blade in towards my spine and slightly down. So the movement looks kind of like this. If this was my spine, here's my shoulder blade. It's going slightly down and in towards my spine. That's it. And it's only about this far. Now what happens when I do that, if I keep all of this intact, move my shoulder blade, it's going to turn my body, turn my shoulders about 45 degrees, and I don't need any hip rotation at this point. Minimal hip turn, 45-degree shoulder turn with 2 inches of shoulder blade movement. That moves my shoulder about 6 to 8 inches, which moves my hand about 2.5 feet, which moves the club about 2.5 yards. I move 2 inches, 2.5 inches. The club moved 2.5 yards. Now, you can try and learn to move the club 2.5 yards and try and put it in the same position every time with your hands, and it's pretty hard because you're not looking where you're trying to move the club, and it's happening behind you, and you're trying to think about setting the club up that way. Or you can learn to just move your shoulder blade 2 inches. Choice is up to you, either way. But if you want to move efficiently, 2 inches of shoulder blade movement in towards your spine will move the club in the exact same spot. It would be very difficult for me to put the club in the same spot here every time. But if I'm just trying to move my shoulder blade 2.5 inches, I can pretty much do it in the same spot every single time without trying. It's a perfect takeaway. I didn't try and put the club down the plane or put it up on plane. I didn't try to position it where it's pointing down the target line. I didn't try to do any of that stuff. I just tried to move my shoulder blade 2.5 inches. That's the way your body's designed to work. If you want to rotate around your center, around your spine, you need to move towards center. When I moved my shoulder blade towards my spine, the club moved that way. I'm moving this way, club moves that way. So let's think about that again. I'm gonna move my shoulder blade, and just to make it simple, I'm gonna think about taking my shoulder straight behind my head. The club moved that way. I didn't try and move the club that way. I'm trying to move away from the club. That forces the club that way. On the downswing, and the opposite is true. Trying to move this way forces the club out this way. So when you start to think about your golf swing in those terms, you start to understand how rotation really works in the rotary swing. So 2 inches of movement, that's all you need to know for the takeaway.